First, Norlon turned out to be Charles' clone, and now M might be Marianne's clone. At least that's the current fan theory. But does it have any credibility? Well, that's what we're gonna find out in today's video. Since M is a brand new character in the new Code Geass story Pure Almaria that just started a few months ago, that's where I'll spend most of my time in answering this question. I also know that many of you have more general questions on that topic, so this is a great opportunity to kill two birds with one stone. Pure Almaria is both a manga and a series of photo novels that take place during Koa Year 4. Koa years are the period of time after the Zero Requiem. Lelouch of the Resurrection takes place during Koa Year 2, then comes the prologue for Rosea the Recapture, which starts in Koa Year 3. After that, the topic of this video, Pure Almaria, occurs. Following that, we have to skip 3 years into the future to continue with the main story of Rosea the Recapture, which takes place during Koa Year 7. Lost Stories is also covering Pure Almaria, but it takes place much later within the timeline of that story. Basically, it goes like this. The photo novels and manga cover different things that follow this chronological order. First, you have the prologue chapters from the novels, then the episodes 1 through 6 also from the novels. The manga chapters also occur during these episodes. Then we have the Almaria Black Flash, which is also part of the photo novels, and that happens into the future. And then after all of that comes Lost Stories coverage of Pure Almaria. So basically, it's way ahead of everything else. By the way, just so we're on the same page, the manga and the photo novels take place in the manga timeline and not the alternative anime timeline like I had originally thought. This is because it includes characters from the manga Lancelot and Gurren that isn't canon in the alternative anime timeline. Editor Chops here. We recently learned that Pure Almaria retconned Neo-Britannia's invasion of the Hokkaido block from Koa Year 3 to Koa Year 4, further proving this is not part of the alternative anime timeline. Now that might sound contradictory because the purpose of Pure Almaria is to bridge the gap between the films and the Rose anime. But if that was their goal, maybe they should have thought about that before including things in this manga that were not in the alternative anime timeline. Now you understand the pain of trying to understand the timelines in Code Geass that even the creators don't fully understand based on stupid shit like this. Anyways, I will release a video in the future that'll break this entire topic down to the best of my ability given all of this bullshit. Since the topic is about M, let's start discussing our introduction to this brand new character. She is rescued by the Izayoi, an intelligence agency founded and led by Kaguya Sumeragi. It consists of many members including Team Shingetsu, which consists of Satori, an 18-year-old half-European, half-Japanese woman with a Geass power that forces people to tell the truth. There is also Doc Jobs, who is responsible for working on the Nightmare frames, and Hakuba, the main protagonist of this manga. Soga Hakuba is unique for this IP because he isn't a teenager. In fact, he's in his 20s and even had a family. I say had because his family was lost after Lelouch detonated Sakuradite in Mount Fuji, and before that, his village was destroyed by Britannia during their initial invasion of Japan. He first joined the Black Knights after the Britannian invasion, and later joined Izayoi as part of his redemption for being unable to protect his family. While we are here, let's discuss the plot of Pure Almaria. So even though the Zero Requiem was a success, there are still conflicts happening around the world. We of course saw that earlier with Lelouch of the Resurrection. Now, Kaguya decides to leave the UFN and start the Izayoi, a group that is designed to stop conflicts before they start. The current situation is uncovering the mysterious nightmare frame called the Marishiten and with Lost Stories, we get more information on what Norlan was up to and more Gia stuff as well, and I imagine that'll be later shown in the photo novels and manga. Even though these writers who are working on this manga are quite talented because they worked on Lancelot and Gurren, I still think they have their work cut out for them in putting together this story, and that's because Rosetta Capture was so awful that they have to incorporate that element into their own story because this is technically a prequel to that anime. So a lot of legwork and they're starting downhill, but so far it seems pretty good. Anyways, let's get back to M being one of the little girls that was rescued from the trafficking. According to Lost Stories, she ran away from the Pyrex Pharmaceuticals, which is a company, and during that was captured by these people. The timelines of this are not entirely clear. Now, while there, unlike the other children, she seems more mature and acclimated to the situation. At times, she doesn't even talk like a child, which is bizarre. Just from her appearance, the resemblance to Marianne is obvious from her hair color, the type of hair, her face, and the eye color. Here is Marianne from Turn 14 when she was much younger, and you can clearly see the resemblance. In Lost Stories, M mentions that she was created to replace someone, and besides Marianne, who else could that be? After the crazy rescue, Ayame returns with the Black Knights to take M into custody. After M thanked Hakuba for saving her in a rather wholesome moment, Ayame then informs Hakuba about the situation in the Middle East, so he has to go there with Satori, and it's there they encounter the Pure Elements G. For the rest of the video, I'm going to use the name Pure Elements G and Marishiten interchangeably because they are both accurate names for the same nightmare frame. The conflict ends with the Marishiten leaving the battlefield, which kind of confused Hakuba. We can also see Miss X, a character introduced in Azura Reflection, watching from a distance. Her involvement is a key piece in solving the M-Marianne connection. And in the first chapter, Miss X is talking to her Peacemark sources and trying to figure out when those people were gonna sell M. She takes advantage of the Izayoi agents for rescuing her. Anyways, the rest of this chapter focused on the characters trying to figure out where the Marishiten came from. We learn that the Marishiten is based on the Gurren Satan 8 elements. That explains why they kind of look alike. Chapter 3 showcases Suzaku and Hakuba saving Kaguya, Doc, Satori, and others from attackers in a funny scene despite the obvious danger everyone was in. After this, Kaguya orders the team to investigate the Marishiten. That leads to everyone headed to Hawaii. And why Hawaii? Because Rakshata is there, and she's an expert on the Gurren, being its creator. Sometime after they arrive, Hakuba reunites with M, which kinda seemed random, but we'll get to later on why it may not have been. Anyways, she's not alone because we can see Miss X is right with her. Keep in mind, Miss X was also seen earlier watching the Pure Elements G. This is further proof there's a connection between M and that nightmare frame. And what a coinkydink! While Hakuba works with the Black Knight forces, trying to stop some stupid idiots from breaking the peace because apparently Toto retired, the Pure Elements G showed up, and just like before, the Marishiten leaves the battlefield after taking out the enemy troops. Before this occurred, Hakuba ran into Matthew Blackstone, the president of Pyrex, that same organization I spoke about earlier. According to Lost Stories, this man ruined M's life, hence why she wanted to run away. I'm not exactly sure what his involvement in M's creation was, but we know whatever it was bad enough to get her to not only want to run away, but admit that this man ruined her life. Now back to the main plot. Rakshata does not know anything about the Marishiten, so she then suggests everyone talk to Lloyd. This leads to our characters arriving at the Republic of Britannia, and we get a nice piece of dialogue that thankfully explains what happened to the Principality of Britannia. Schneisel and Cecile greet our characters, and this this is my favorite part so far in the entire manga. I mean, you can never have too much Cecile, am I right? And even Doc is in awe of how beautiful Cecile is. May we all be as lucky. And in the most recent chapter, which just came out, the team heads out with Cecile to further discuss the Marishiten, and they get to talk to Schneisel in his sexy Oval Office.
Okay, oh yes, one minor note here.
Lloyd was kidnapped.
Next we have...
But what about Miss X? What's her involvement in all of this? To answer that, we get a look at the photo novels. In the Black Flash chapter, after Hakuba captured Isher, Miss X heads over to the Pure Elements G, asking the pilot the whereabouts of one William Bish. You heard that right. William Bish is one of the most important characters in the extended universe without actually making an appearance. If this is not a household name for you, let me remind you, this is the character responsible for coming up with the cloning technology that made Norlon and the Lelouch clones in that wonderful Genetic RE Code story. His involvement here is problematic. Why would Miss X ask the pilot of the Marishiten where William Bish is? Well, the answer is because M is the pilot of the Marishiten, and we know that she's a clone, most likely a clone of Marianne. So it makes sense if you think about it. If Miss X wants to find William Bish, what better way to do this than to work with one of his creations? What's interesting is that unlike Norlon, who is Chaos incarnate, because he views human as like a plague or something he has to wipe out, M seems to be the opposite. She opposes conflict and uses the Marishiten to stop people from fighting. Also, in Lost Stories, it did reveal that M was the pilot of the Marishiten, and she is a member of the Peace Mark, so she is working with Ms. X, which is obvious from the manga, but again, the game makes this perfectly clear what is going on. Now, we know that M is the pilot of the Pure Elements G, so let's focus on some other interesting information that we learned specifically about this nightmare frame. Because you probably have questions like, where did this nightmare frame come from? And how can a 6-year-old even pilot a nightmare frame as complicated as the Gurren Satan 8 elements? In episode 6 of the photo novels, we learned that Yvonne, a former member of the organization called Camelot, most likely created the Pure Elements G. By the way, in case you forgot, Lloyd, Cecile, and Suzaku worked for the Advanced Special Envoy Engineering Corps, but then that organization was reorganized into Camelot, becoming the primary organization for creating nightmare frames. I guess the success of the Lancelot was a key factor in making this decision. Anyways, we also learned that Stanley, you know, that freaky scientist from Rosé Other Capture, was involved as well. Apparently, Yvonne worked with the 9 to 5, which was Norlon, if you remember from Rosé Other Capture episode 7, and Stanley was the chief engineer. I knew he was working on nightmare frames for the Einberg, besides the Roomba and the Foulbout. I just wish we saw that in the anime though. But here's the craziest revelation from this, okay? Listen carefully. So they couldn't figure out where Yvonne is, which was annoying, but then Lloyd salvages the situation by asking one simple question. Have you ever heard of the LDM project? If you don't immediately see the connection, well, that makes sense because LDM, or Legacy Development Model Nightmare Frames, were introduced in the clone story from Genetic RE Code, and this is their first mention since. In that story, Percy Frankenstein made LDM versions of the Gawain, Lancelot Albion, and the Gurren Satan 8 elements. All these nightmare frames were piloted by the Lelouch clones. My theory is that the LDM models are designed to allow children or preteens to pilot them, which explains how M and the L clones could pilot these advanced nightmare frames. and I lump M into here because the Marishiten, according to the photo novels and Lost Stories, is also an LDM model. So now you see how everything is connected. Now, if you think this doesn't work because Genetic RE code isn't canon, well, you're wrong. But don't feel bad about that because I thought the same thing many years ago. Genetic RE code is part of the alternative anime and manga timelines. I know this because the game brings up things that are canon in those timelines. For example, it indirectly references Sherry in Charles' bio, or how one of the clones tells Cornelia that she became a leader of the Black Knights, and both of those things occurred in Rosea's recapture. So, like I said before, I think you can finally see the big picture now of how all this comes together. So this means that William Bish, under Charles' orders, first made Norlon, who was a full adult by R2, so this happened many years ago. And of course, Norlon also became the Knight of Five. Now, according to Lost Stories, M is 6 years old, which means William Bish would have had to make her in 2016 for her to be 6 years old now, and that of course assumes that clones age the same way as normal people do, which the story hasn't given us any information to know one way or another, but I assume it works like that. Now, if you don't know, Norlon was behind the creation of the LDM nightmare frames, and because we discussed that the LDM nightmare frames can be used by children, then it must have some kind of technological advancement to allow this. And so my theory is he was researching a way to create a mental link between the Falbout and the Roombas, and so these LDM nightmare frames were a way to advance that technology. Now, while all this sounds interesting, there are some outstanding questions that need to be answered. How did Miss X and M steal a powerful nightmare frame from Norlon? At this point, we don't know. Editor Chops here. In the latest photo novel chapter, we learned that Orpheus is back and stole the Marishiten from Yvonne. That's how Miss X got it. Also, Yvonne was arrested, thus solving the mystery. We also don't know how they met up following M's rescue. How did Norlon lose track of M to the point where not only did she escape, but she was captured by a trafficking ring? She fled the lab, and that's all we know. I'm not sure how a 6-year-old does that. Now, questions about the cloning of Marianne. Why did Charles not clone Marianne much sooner? Around the same time he made Norlon. According to Turn 14, they were already acquainted in 1997 when she was 16 years old. If the plan was to make backups, why weren't they considered at that time? Assuming that clones age the same way as humans, the technology existed a long time ago because Norlon is a full-grown adult by R2, so he must have been created, 20 plus years ago, which might have been around 1997 or even before that. The only explanation I can come up with is that maybe M was made earlier, but wasn't released till much later for whatever reason. And as I said with Norlon, the same argument applies here, which is I don't know how they could even transfer their minds into these clones. I know Percy said in the clone story he was going to transfer Lelouch's mind from C's world into L0, but they never explained how that would actually work. Yes, Marianne's Gias does transfer her mind into another body, but she didn't know it did that until after she died. Therefore, she couldn't have planned on having an ability she didn't know that she had. That's why it doesn't work. So there are holes in this theory, and we need further clarification in the story to know for sure if this is or isn't canon. But we can put the pieces together, what we discussed in this video, to reasonably conclude that M is most likely Marianne's clone for the following reasons. 1. Lost Story confirms she was created to be a replacement for someone, which means she's supposed to be a clone of someone. Who else would it be if it wasn't Marianne? Because point number 2, she is a splitting image of Marianne in almost every single way. Point 3, they are both excellent Nightmare Frame pilots. Even the later chapters in the photo novels are called Black Flash, and Marianne's nickname was Marianne the Flash. The wordplay here is not an accident. Number 4, Miss X looked for her so she could find William Bish, the person behind the cloning technology. Obviously, talking to one of his clones would help in this department department, which further proves that M is a clone, and most likely a clone of Marianne. And number 5, the Marishiten Nightmare Frame is an LDM model, the same models used by the L clones in the clone story in Jurassic RE code, and as I discussed earlier, the technology in those LDMs must allow children to pilot it, which explains how M can pilot a nightmare frame that is advanced as the Gurren Satan 8 elements. But wait, you're probably wondering, if M is a child clone of Marianne, who's that naked clone of Marianne on the cover of the manga? Good question. Let's go back to Matthew for a second in this panel. Now if you look carefully, you can see a woman named Milligan Jolene. Notice how she looks like Marianne and her first name starts with M. There's no way that's just a coincidence. So the theory is that naked woman is Milligan, or maybe there are other Marianne clones and that woman could be a different person altogether. Percy Frankenstein made multiple copies of L clones as backup for the main L clones. I wouldn't be surprised if something similar happened with M. Isn't that exciting? An army of Marianne clones running wild in Code Geass? I wonder how Lelouch would take all of this. Speaking of clones, I referenced the clone story from Jurassic RE Code like 30 seconds ago. That story, for better or for worse, is going to be crucial for improving your understanding of Rose Other Capture and Pure Almaria going forward. So you're going to need a summary of it since Jurassic RE Code was never localized and it EOS'd many years ago. Don't worry, I got you covered because here's a summary of the clone story, and I'll see you guys in that one.